I never imagined that a single lie could tear my life apart. That day, my daughter Emily's casual remark was like a bomb that shattered the world of my husband Mark and me. She laughed and said, "It's not even my real dad." My heart sank, and Mark's face turned cold. I tried to explain, to salvage the situation, but the lid of the truth had already been lifted, and the consequences of the lie plunged me into endless panic. He had just went out onto the patio to talk with one of the moms about some fundraiser crap, and Mark had already gone inside when I returned. The vibe was totally off. Mark stood in the hallway as pid as a ghost, his lips from a thin line. Emily's voice was drifting out of her room loud enough to drown out her friends. Laughter. Chess. Not even my real father. Emily was giggling, as if she had just told the best joke ever. My mother stated, "He has no idea." I froze. My stomach fell so quickly that I felt I was going to be that. Mark did not glance at me. He simply gazed at the door to Emily's room, as if he couldn't believe what he heard. I wanted to say, explain or do anything, but my mind went blank. It felt as if the walls were closing in. I attempted to play it off. I touched his arm and whispered, "Kids say stupid things all the time." He jerked away as if I had burned him. She's probably not sure what she's talking about. He turned to me, his expression stony. "Does she?" he inquired, his voice low and harsh. Is she even sure what she's talking about? I did not have an answer. Mark walked straight out the front door without saying anything. The rest of the celebration was a blur. I can't recall saying farewell to the other parents. I only know I was on autopilot, trying not to lose my cool in front of Emily and her friends. When Emily then went to bed, I sat on the couch and stared at my phone. I almost expected Mark to call or text. He did not. It was after midnight when he returned. He did not smash the door or yell. He simply sauntered in as if he had gone for a little drive to cool off. That almost made things worse. He sat across from me and said, "We need to talk." I switched into damage control mode. "Mark, you know how children are." Emily most likely overheard something and made up a funny story to impress her friends. She's that age. You know, they all want to act as if they know everything. He said nothing, just stared at me with this expression I had never seen before. It wasn't necessarily rage. It was terrible. It seemed as if he was trying to figure out who I really was. "Linda," he eventually murmured, his voice calm but forceful. "Is Emily my daughter or not?" I'm not sure what possessed me to lie. Perhaps it was panic. Maybe it was a habit over the years. He had become so adept at avoiding the truth that it felt instinctive. "Of course, she's your daughter." I spoke, my voice cracking slightly. "I'm not even sure why you would ask me that." He just continued staring at me as if he could see straight through me. "So why would she say that? Why would she inform her friends that you told her I was her father?" "I do not know." I raised my voice a little too loudly. Perhaps one of her small buddies suggested the idea to her. Maybe she's upset with you for not allowing her obtain the ridiculous iPhone she wanted. Children are manipulative, Mark. They say whatever they believe will elicit a reaction. He did not buy it. I could see it in his eyes. "Linda, lay away on it." He murmured softly, as if he were giving me one final chance to confess. "Is there anything you aren't telling me?" "No, I spoke too soon. You're being silly." That's when everything started coming apart. He did not yell at me or accuse me of lying. He simply stood up, grabbed his keys, and walked out the door again. This time he didn't return by morning. I was in a panic. I called him, texted him, and left voicemail messages. Nothing. I even phoned his sister, but she had not heard from him either. I spent the entire day pacing the house and repeating the conversation in my thoughts. Emily didn't appear to notice anything wrong, which was a minor blessing. When Mark finally called that evening, his tone was chilly and disconnected. "I need some time to consider," he explained. "Do not call me." "What exactly are you talking about?" I demanded. "You're just going to leave your family for whatever stupid reason?" Emily remarked. Because of some stupid thing. Emily explained. He repeated his voice, full of cynicism. Sure, Linda. That is all it is. Then he hung up. The silence within the house was overwhelming. After Mark hung up, I sat there, phone in hand, staring at the call log as if it would give me answers. But all I could think was that he knew, or at least he suspects, and I had no idea how to solve it. The next few days were a haze. Mark did not come home. I tried phoning him again, but his phone went directly to voicemail. Emily inquired where Daddy was, and I told her he was on a business trip. She did not question it. That's the problem with Mark. He has always been trustworthy and predictable. He isn't the sort to storm off and disappear without explanation. So if he was doing it now, it meant things were worse than I imagined. I couldn't stop replaying Emily's remarks in my mind. H.E.S. not even my real father. She said it so nonchalantly, as if it were simply another reality in her life. I wanted to yell at her and ask why she would say such a harsh thing, but I knew I couldn't. How can you explain to your 13-year-old daughter that the things she said, as a joke, could blow up the entire family? On the third day, Mark finally arrived home. It was beyond 10 p.m., and I was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine, pretending to watch television, when I heard his car pull into the driveway. My heart raced. I wasn't sure if I was relieved or afraid. He entered carefully as if he didn't want to wake Emily. He didn't look at me as he passed past the living room and directly into the bedroom. I followed him, my bare feet resting quietly on the carpet. Mark, I said lightly as I entered the room. He was taking clothing out of the closet and throwing them into a duffel bag. My chest tightened. Are you leaving? I asked, my voice trembling. He did not respond right away. He zipped the bag shut and then turned to me. His face remained serene, but his eyes were hard. I need answers. Linda, hush, he explained, and I won't stay here till I receive them. I experienced a surge of panic. I'm not sure what you're talking about, I replied, even though I understood exactly what he meant. Cut that. He snapped, his voice low, yet sharp. Is Emily my daughter or not? Of course, she is. I spoke, my voice rising. Why do you constantly asking me this? Because I spoke with Emily, he explained, his tone icy. I inquired where she got the idea that I was her father. Do you know what she said? She claims you told her when she was younger that you didn't know the truth, and she was not supposed to tell me. I felt as if the air had been taken from the room. My thoughts raced, attempting to come up with an excuse. I tried to find a way to spin this, but nothing came up. She is lying, I replied softly. Mark, you know how kids are. They make things up. She didn't sound like she was making things up. He spoke, his voice tight. And frankly, Linda, I don't care what Emily said. I want to hear it from you. She is my daughter or not. I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. My chest felt as if it were caving in. Mark's eyes narrowed, and he shook his head, indicating disappointment, but not surprise. That is what I thought, he said, quietly. He grabbed his backpack and began walking past me. Wait, I murmured, reaching for his arm. Where are you going to? My sister's, he spoke, without glancing at me. Not call me until you are prepared to tell me the truth. Then he was gone. The house felt more empty than ever. Emily was already in bed, fully ignorant of the tempest raging around her. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the location where Mark's duffel bag had been a part of me. Wanted to blame him. He was acting irrationally, exaggerating the situation. So what if Emily is not his biological child? He had raised her, didn't. He has been her father for 13 years. What difference does it make? But another part of me realized I couldn't continue. Lying was in the first, not forever. Mark was tireless in his pursuit of answers. He wouldn't stop until he had them. The truth was bound to come out, eventually. The difficulty was that I was convinced I could manage the consequences. The next several days were filled with unanswered texts and phone calls. Mark refused to leave his sister's house until I gave him an explanation. I could not blame him. If I were, he'd be irritated too. Despite all that was unraveling, I couldn't bring myself to come clean. The more I kept quiet, the more difficult it was to admit the truth. I reminded myself that I was doing it for Emily, for Mark, and our family. If I told him right now, everything would change. Everything we had constructed over the course of our lives would collapse. But when I thought about it, I realized I was only attempting to protect myself. I knew who Emily's biological father was. I had known since she was born. His name was Brian. He was an old co-worker of mine, some guy I met while still working at the marketing agency. Brian was not the type of man you'd bring home to your mother, but he knew how to turn on the charm. We had a thing back then. A brief fling, focused on casual enjoyment. He wasn't into commitment. I never wanted to settle down and was definitely not interested in becoming a father. But when I found out I was pregnant, I contacted him, expecting some sort of assistance, or simply a simple, "Hey, I'm here, if you need me." But Brian was present. I had to make a decision, and I selected Mark. He was stable, dependable, and really concerned about me. I told myself that it didn't matter who the biological father was. Mark was already there in the picture, and he would be the one who raised her. So I let it go. I convinced myself it was the correct decision. But deep inside, I knew the truth. And now, as I sat in the solitude of our home, I felt as if the weight of that secret was ready to crush me. I could not quit thinking about Brian. I hadn't spoken with him in years. He made it apparent that he did not want anything to do with me or the baby. I did not blame him. We'd never been serious, and I didn't expect him to come around. But knowing that he was the one who could have been Emily's father, and that he had refused, fueled a new level of rage and hatred. I wasn't sure what to do with it. I realized, I couldn't keep pretending this falsehood would persist indefinitely. Mark stared at me the other night, his face filled with skepticism and despair. It devastated me, but also terrified me. I had no idea what would happen if I told him the truth, that the man he raised as his daughter for over a decade wasn't really his, and I didn't really have a decent explanation. How could I tell him? I had been keeping this from him for so long. How could I excuse the fact that even now, a part of me wanted to keep Brian out of the picture, despite the fact that he was Emily's biological father? I couldn't bring myself to tell Mark the truth about what happened between me, and Brian had rejected me. When I informed him I was pregnant, making it apparent that he didn't want to be a part of it. I couldn't blame him for this either. But I did not want to admit it to Mark. I didn't want to confess that I had let Brian walk away and had, in some strange way, accepted it. I began to consider how I was going to confront Mark. When he returned, he had made it apparent that he needed answers, and I didn't have any decent ones. I was caught between the need to tell him everything and the fear of what might happen if I did. What if he leaves me? What if he can never look at me the same way again? What if Emily found out too? I had fought so hard to shield her from the truth, from who her father truly was. I did not want her to know. I did not want her to consider Brian as an option. I knew he was never going to come around. But perhaps I was mistaken. Perhaps keeping this secret was as horrible as anything else. I couldn't stop thinking about what it'd done to him, and how long it kept him in the dark. But then, what was I expected to do? I made my decisions. And now, I had to live with them. When Mark returned, I still had not made up my decision. I wasn't sure what to say. I wasn't sure if I should keep faking or finally tell him everything. But when he walked through the door, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever remain the same. Mark passed through the door as if he had nothing else to say to me. His eyes scanned the room as if he were looking for something that didn't exist. It was the same chill he had felt when he left. But this time, there was more to it. His frustration, hurt and disappointment. Everything was written on his face. He stopped in the doorway for a time, taking in the sight of me sitting there, curled up in a chair, with my arms, Sally, wrapped over myself. he said. Nothing at first, just remained there, allowing the silence to hang heavily on both of us. Finally, he ended the stillness. His voice was low and steady. We need to talk. I nodded, my heart racing. I could not bring myself to look him in the eye. The guilt felt oppressive. I realized that if I kept hiding the truth and lying to him, I would only make matters worse. But I cowed and just blurted out. I could not tell him about Brian. Not yet. I needed to figure out how to make things right, if that is even feasible. Mark, I began, my voice shaky and hesitant. I never intended for this to happen. I did not want it to go this far. So why didn't he tell me the truth? He was becoming furious, his voice increasing with each word. Linda, why did you lie to me? Why did you let me raise someone else's child for years without saying anything? I felt my stomach turn. His comments ripped through me like a knife, and I could not bring myself to respond. I opened my mouth, but no sound emerged. I trusted you, he replied, shaking his head. I have always trusted you. And now, I'm not sure what to believe. You've been lying to me about something this important, and I'm not sure I can ever trust you again. I closed my eyes, attempting to keep back the tears that were about to fall. It made so many mistakes and bad decisions, and I had no idea how to fix anything. I acknowledged that. I made a mistake, I murmured, feeling the words like a lead ball in my chest. But Mark, I never intended for you to find out like this. I just didn't know how to tell you. I wasn't sure what to say. His eyes softened just slightly. I could see the conflict in his face. He wanted to believe me. He wanted to comprehend. But how could he? You should have informed me from the beginning. He added, his voice lower, but no less hurt. I've been nurturing her and loving her as if she were my own. And now, I find out she isn't even mine. I flinched at his remarks, although knowing they were true. I did not want it to spoil everything. I said, finally, finding the words I had been struggling to express. I did not want to lose you. I did not want to jeopardize what we had by lying to me. He inquired, his tone skeptical. By keeping this from me for so many years, how could you believe that was acceptable? I thought it was the correct thing to do, I confessed. Finally, meeting his gaze, I thought that was the greatest option for Emily. I didn't want her to feel different, as if she did not belong in our family. I could feel Colin's pain in his eyes as he approached me. He was still irritated. I am still baffled, but there was something else there, something I didn't expect. There was pity, perhaps even a little regret. You don't understand, do you? He said with a hushed voice. It wasn't only about Emily. It was about us. And trust. You've thrown away everything we've built, and I'm not sure if I can solve it. The hush stretched between us. Again, I wanted to apologize and ask him to understand. But the truth was that I was sure I understood myself. I had made numerous justifications. I rationalized everything in my head to protect myself. I had convinced myself that keeping Brian out of the picture was the correct thing to do, regardless of who Emily's real father was. But standing here with Mark, I couldn't ignore it any longer. The truth had to come out. I have not told you everything, I replied quietly. Mark froze. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. What do you mean? I took a long breath, hoping to calm my worries. Emily has a father. Mark, it is not you, but Brian. I apologize. I should have told you sooner. The words felt like a weight had been lifted from my chest, but they also felt like a bomb poised to detonate. Mark's face lost color, as I watched for a long time. He did not speak. Brian, and Hussein the fish, he repeated, his voice barely audible. You're telling me that Emily's father hasn't stepped up in all these years? I slowly nodded, my heart breaking. I was afraid. Mark, I wasn't sure what else to do. I figured if I kept it from you, everything would be fine. But now I'm not sure how to remedy this. I'm not sure how to make things right. Mark simply stood there, his gaze unreadable, before turning away from me. He came up to the door and paused with his hand on the handle. I need some time, he explained. his voice scratchy, and not sure what to think anymore. And with that, he went. I sank on the couch, feeling the weight of everything he'd done. It lied. It kept secrets. And suddenly, everything was coming apart. I had no idea if I could ever make this right, or if Mark would ever forgive me. But one thing was obvious. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. I did not hear from Mark for several days after that. It was a peculiar type of silence that seemed to last forever. I could tell he was processing everything and figuring out how to deal with me, Emily, and everything else. I could feel him sliding away, but there was nothing I could do about it. I had not merely lost his trust, I had shattered it. But I was not about to sit here and let him depart without a fight. He eventually returned, but it was evident that he had changed. He appeared aloof and more closed off than normal. It was as if the distance between us had grown into a real chasm. I could see the hatred and betrayal in his eyes, but now there was something more, a sense of finality, as if he was willing to give up on everything. We were sitting in the living room when he dropped the bomb. He remained quiet for a long time, staring at the floor as if steeling himself for something. I was on edge, waiting for him to speak, because I knew it wouldn't be good. I can't do it anymore, he murmured. His voice lifeless. Emily is not mine. She has never been. And I can't keep pretending that she is. I felt my stomach drop. The air between us became frigid. Mark. No, I muttered, almost imploring. But he was having none of it. He said, I'm done. As if the words were a final verdict. I'm done with this entire affair. You and your lies. I'm done raising someone else's child. I'm finished with the whole dang affair. I can't keep doing this. I'm not sure who I am anymore. I wanted to dispute with him. I wanted to get him to see reason. But how could I have done it? He kept this secret for so long. I had gotten him into this predicament. And suddenly, everything was falling apart. But then the worst happened. Mark jumped up from the couch, stone-faced, and I could see it in his eyes. He was ready to walk away. Emily, yes, not my duty anymore. He spoke. His words, I see, and piercing. Him finished pretending that's where I lost it. You cannot simply walk away from her. I got up from the couch. My voice was sharp and frantic. She is still your daughter. You cannot simply turn your back on her. Because of me. She has been your daughter for years. You have reared her. You cannot simply disown her like that. Mark shook his head. At his jaw tightened. She is not my daughter. Not anymore. I'm not sure what else to tell you. Don't you dare. I yelled, my heart hammering into my chest. A good man would care about her. A real man would not abandon a child because of a mistake I made. She needs you. Mark, she has been calling you Dad for years. You can't just toss everything away because you're used at me. I could see the hatred in his eyes, and I felt he was about to burst. Do you think you can guilt me into doing this? Do you think you can make me feel horrible about what you did? I owe her nothing. Brittany, not after all. Not after this. I took a long breath and tried to relax down, but I counted the words spilled out before I could stop them. You owe her everything. Mark, you owe her a chance at a normal life with a family. You cannot just walk away. Not like this. I was desperate. I knew. But I was also correct. This wasn't only about me anymore. This was about Emily. I was going to let Mark destroy what little stability she had left. Mark snapped. In not doing this. In no longer playing this game. She is now your problem. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him, leaving me standing there, astonished and breathless. I sank on the couch, feeling as if the entire world had crumbled beneath me. I had fouled up everything. My marriage, my daughter's life, and now I was going to lose everything. But I wasn't finished battling yet. Mark might have walked out, but I wasn't ready to let him destroy the life we'd created. I could not. I called Emily into the room. Emily, sweetheart, come here, I said, my voice trembling. I wasn't sure what to say. I had no idea how to convey what had just transpired. She entered slowly, her eyes puffy from crying. She had already been through so much and I couldn't help but feel like I dragged her into this mess. Dude, she inquired, quietly. Her voice was small. Listen, Emily. Mark is upset, but I do want you to understand something. I replied, grasping her hand in mine. You are still my daughter, no matter what. I do not care what Mark says. What does Yuri? My girlfriend. And that will not change. Well, work this out together. Okay. She nodded, but I could see confusion in her eyes. She was no longer a small girl, and I knew she had questions, but I didn't know the answers. But no matter how hard I tried to keep it together, for Emily, I knew the truth. Mark might have walked away, but the actual issue was me. It made my decisions, and now they're tearing everything apart. I couldn't blame him for wanting to leave, even if it shattered my heart. So it was up to me. I had to pick up the pieces of this catastrophe, even though I had no idea how. As time passed, the tension in the house became unbearable. I could feel the weight of everything slamming down on me, but I was prepared to face the full extent of what had done. Every chat I had with Mark seemed to drag us apart. I tried to apologize. I tried to make him understand that I was who he believed I was. Perhaps I wasn't, but it wasn't important anymore. Then one morning, just before the sun rose, I heard a knock on the door. It was Mark. He stood there with a suitcase. His face, a mask of determination. He didn't say anything. Save that. It was over. He couldn't do it anymore. He was finished. I wanted to beg him to stay, telling him everything would be fine, that we could solve it. But I did not. I just stood there, quiet while he passed me with his baggage. Emily's, not mine. Linda, he murmured, his voice breaking slightly. But it wasn't enough to deter him. You led me to assume she was. He made me raise her. But I can't do it anymore. I am done with that. He left. I stood transfixed in the doorway, staring at the empty place where he had been. My heart felt hollow, like if the entire house was empty now. I heard Emily's voice in the other room and knew the questions were coming. It was long before she discovered me. Mom, she said, standing at the doorway, her expression a mix of perplexity and pain. As he is he actually gone? I nodded, not trusting my ability to talk. I was sure how to tell her the truth. I was sure how to explain anything I had done. She deserved the truth, but I was prepared to face it alone, let alone speak it openly. I'm sorry, Emily, I replied quietly, tears welling up in my eyes. She has gone. Her face wrinkled with confusion. But why? Where has he gone? Is he coming back? The question hit me like a punch in the stomach. I was sure how to respond. Mark was not coming back. He could not. After all, he was not coming back. Honey, I said softly, swallowing the lump in my throat. But that doesn't mean you aren't loved. You've still got me. Emily blinked, a tear running down her cheek. But who is my real father? Then, what if he's not? I felt my heart break. How was I supposed to inform her? How could I convey to her that the guy she had known as a father was not actually a father at all? How could I ever tell her the truth about who her biological father was? I swallowed hard, feeling my chest constrict. The truth was nasty, and I was prepared to confront it. I have no idea. Emily, I murmured, but I am here. I am still here. I will always take care of you. But the reality continued to claw at me. Emily needed to know that Mark was not her father. He was somebody else. I hadn't spoken that name in years. I buried a face deep in the past. I didn't want to keep this secret any longer, but I was sure I could handle the weight of telling her for the time being. However, I simply held her as we both cried. I tried to console her, but a part of me knew it was over. This marked the end of everything. Mark was gone for good. My marriage was over. My family, for whom I had fought, was no longer with me. But I could not blame Mark. Not really. It pushed him to this point. He had lied. It kept secrets. My impetuous decisions had led us here. I was to blame for everything that had gone wrong. And now, it was just me and Emily left to pick up the shards of a broken life. I wasn't prepared for the consequences or the truth to come out. But I knew it would happen soon. Nobody could live in a falsehood indefinitely. Not even me. I was not the victim here. It made my choices. It wrecked everything. I watched Emily brush away her tears and wonder if things would ever be the same again. I couldn't force myself to lie to her any longer. No, I whispered. Things will never be the same with that. The life I knew came to an end, leaving me to deal with the repercussions. Here's the next story. Another Friday evening. And while I was late coming home, my wife, Samantha, arrived. Even later. I didn't like her going out after work with her friends. But what can a guy do? Every pair requires a life apart from their companion. Vicky was also very thoughtful, and not only when she was leaving, but also in informing me where they were going, and making sure she arrived home early. She was usually no later than 8 p.m. this afternoon. Vicky sent me a text message when I was out on a site inspection out for cocktails with the gals home. Late, love you. Vicky is generally reliable in her outings. In fact, it rarely occurs more than once, every 3 to 4 weeks. Why does it annoy me so much? Well, that's another story to summarize. Let me state that I have reservations regarding ladies in general. No, that is not totally accurate. Either. I am skeptical of people, male or female, who spend time at a bar with their buddies, but not with their partner, or who travel frequently for business. Vicky does both, but the travels are the most difficult for me by far. You might be wondering why I have these issues and how they affect my opinion of Vicky. I'll tell you a quick, painful narrative, so you may understand for yourself. I grew raised in a bar. My parents owned and operated the most popular pub in our little town near St. Louis, Missouri. They also owned an upmarket French restaurant on the other side of the bar building. People would go from miles away to dine, then head next door to the lounge nightclub to dance the night away. I witnessed everything, and my parents instilled in me the importance of caution from a young age. It was the summer I turned 16, and they felt I needed to learn the business. My older brother and sister had also started working at the firm at the age of 16. My brother, who was 21, had a degree in hotel and restaurant management and was in charge of the bar when I started working there. My sister was almost 19 and had recently started university. Of course, I was too young to work in the bar. I was tasked with busting tables in the restaurant. I despised this commitment, since like most teenagers, I preferred to roam the streets and hang out with my pals. I wanted to work as little as possible for a lot of money, doing something I enjoyed, preferably in an environment where I could flirt with a lot of young attractive girls. I had barely been working at the restaurant for 3 weeks when my perspective shifted. My God, I saw so many breasts that I thought I was going to go blind. I also got to look up a lot of the infamous little black dresses several times. My father or mother had to come to the doorway between the bar and the restaurant to return me to my duties at the restaurant. My sister was working that evening. She approached me and said, "Donnie, you better get back to your work and ignore everything you see, or you'll get in trouble." I turned to her and said, "But sis, that's Mrs. Horton, and she's out with a man who isn't even wearing underwear. Do you suppose Mr. Horton knows? Wow, I can't wait to tell the boys. This is incredible." Sarah looked worried, glanced over her shoulder and whispered, "Oh no." At that time, I felt my father's hard touch on my shoulder. He held it strongly and shouted, "Don, join me right now." He turned and strolled across the dining room, and crossed the dining room, past the waiter station and into his office. I followed him slowly, and honestly, apprehensively. I had been ordered back to my task several times that night, and I knew I was ready to have a serious chat with my father. When I entered the office, he looked at me and said, "Close the door and sit down." I thought, oh no, it was in the first. This is going to be extremely horrible. I felt almost sick to my stomach as I sat there, watching my father inspect me. Finally, he groaned and began speaking. "Don, I should have discussed this with you before allowing you to start working here. But I simply didn't. I had to have the same conversation with your brother and sister too. And believe me, it doesn't get easier with time, Mrs. Horton is a beautiful woman, isn't she? Son, my father inquired. That statement stunned me so much that I jumped and felt lightheaded. I was curious where my father was going with that inquiry and why he shifted the subject as I was attempting to craft my response. He inquired again. Isn't she? I gulped. Horton shook my head. Yes, whispering. Dedler had his elbows on his desk, intertwining his fingers, and resting his chin on his thumbs. I still recall his sigh, which was an indication of grief. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and continued talking. Even after 2 decades, I can still recall his comments. He said, Son, this enterprise is our livelihood. It supports the entire family. It provides us with a comfortable home and pool. It sent your brother to university and will send your sister and you there as well. It will provide for all of us for many years, if we do not do anything to jeopardize it. Don, if you see someone, walking in here with their family, smile and greet them by name. You can communicate while performing your responsibilities if the consumer wants you to. However, keep in mind that managing a business like this requires selective hearing and vision. Maintaining discretion is an important aspect of working in the food service and bar sector. You don't see anything. You shorten. If someone, enters with a person of the opposite gender, who is not a member of their family, you address them as sir or mum unless they tell you. Otherwise, you don't recall them being here. In such circumstances, you don't remember what they did or how they dressed. If our customers do anything inappropriate, we ignore it as much as possible and do not discuss it outside of the establishment. The entire crew is held to the same stringent standards. If I ever hear somebody on the team chatting about a customer, I fire them. Over the years, I've had to let go of some genuinely employees who call and keep their tongues shut about the customers. We are known for our secrecy, as well as the quality of our food and service, son. You're young, and I know your hormones are high heck. Even at my age, I notice women like Mrs. Horton. When given the opportunity, your mother knows. I do it and you will too. But she also realizes it's like window shopping. You look, but never buy or try on the items. I don't expect you to stop looking, but I do expect you to use your discretion and avoid being as overt as you were tonight. Something else you should be aware of, son, is that people like Mrs. Horton are frequently detected. Gossip will begin elsewhere and eventually reach your husband. If he is like most men, it will devastate their marriage. People who cheat on their spouse tend to become negligent, and the spouse eventually finds out. We don't want to be the source of something like that. But many of them have young children, and divorce has a serious impact on them. Now get back to work, and remember what I told you. I resumed my duties next day and worked in the restaurant intermittently throughout high school and college. I never spread tales about the customers, but I saw much too much infidelity for my age. As I grew older and began buzzing the bar, I noticed groups of men or women coming in for a night out. I realized that the people I knew, who were married, were engaging in behaviors that would not pass the spouse test I had acquired. Perhaps I read too much, because I became impatient of those who went out late at night. I observed that many people visiting the region for work would flirt and try to pick up locals. This is fine if they are not married, but many of them were, or wore rings that indicated they were. They repeatedly flirted with one of our married customers. I came to feel contempt and disappointment for them, but everyone was handled with the same level of courtesy and caution. After all, we want to assure repeat business. And I saw that folks who came to these gatherings and left after 1 or 2 drinks usually had good stable marriages. Those that stayed late into the night frequently had troubled marriages, and many eventually divorced. During my freshman year of college, my father hired a new waiter. This was the first time I saw Samantha. As we worked together, I became infatuated for the next 2 years. We fell in love. We went on dates and met their families and extended relatives. We spoke and knew we were soulmates. We laughed at the cheats that visited the establishment. Finally, the Christmas, before we were to graduate from college, I asked Vicky to marry me. By that point, We were both certain that our perspectives on life were perfectly aligned and that we were destined to be companions forever. The only glitch in our romance was our parents' insistence on a prenuptial agreement. Vicky and I were certain we were life mates and considered it superfluous. My parents controlled the business and, to my astonishment, had significant investment holdings. They sought to protect such assets should I inherit them. To my surprise, Vicky's parents wished the same for her. They possessed a large estate and did not want Vicky's possible part divided with me. In the event of divorce, the agreement structure addressed these issues. We agreed that anything we owned prior to marriage or inherited from our separate families would remain our property. In the case of divorce, the agreement also included retirement accounts. Each of us would keep our own. The only assets we would divide were those obtained together after marriage. The agreement even included provisions for child care. In the case of a divorce involving small children, if one of us traveled more frequently than the other, custody would be awarded to the parent who traveled the least, unless it would endanger the children. Finally, graduation day arrived. Vicky obtained a BS in finance and landed a good job with a locally based stock brokerage firm. I got a BS in construction management minor in landscape architecture. After college, I worked for a construction company for 2 years to obtain practical experience. Vicky and I weren't especially interested in the restaurant or bar sector. My parents had established it, and we delegated responsibility for its management to my sister and brother. Mother remained the accountant, and Dad was just Dad. He was the authoritative figure, even though it didn't appear on paper. After 2 years of working for another company, I set up my own construction and landscaping business. Vicky and I could barely manage our mortgage and car payments, so my parents used resources from the family organization to support the business. I was paid a salary to handle it. Initially, things were difficult for us, but Vicky steadily improved in her work. Finally, one day, she returned home. Pleased, she had been picked for a position with the brokerage's compliance team. This division ensures that officers follow all of the Securities and Exchange Commission's laws and regulations. The only drawback was that her new position required some travel, but just 3 or 4 days each month. However, considering my past, this is cause for alarm as time passed. My business grew. I progressed from little renovation projects to adding rooms and garages, then to building full new structures and landscaping them. I was satisfied with the arrangement, never attempted to transfer the business from the corporation to my person. To my delight, I just proceeded to earn an increasing amount of money. The business's value and gross income increased. Year after year, I soon learned to handle Vicky's travel. Though I was never totally comfortable with it, I was nevertheless satisfied with her girls' nights out. She went out occasionally, never more than once a month, and I was generally home by 8 p.m. Of course, I had to travel on occasion, and I used to go out for a drink after work with the construction crews or office staff. That's simply good leadership. I did, however, depart after a few of drinks. Usually, I got home no more than an hour later than usual, even if I went out with my staff. Unless, of course, Vicky joined me. After 3 years of marriage, Vicky and I decided to start a family. Patrick was our first child, and my daughter, Susan, arrived 18 months later. She was really petite, and as she matured, she utterly captured me by the age of before. She looked exactly like her mother, a junior variant. She was going to be a great heartbeater. When she grew older, Vicky's skill grew over time, and she became known as the person to call when a difficult office situation arose. She identified the problems and knew how to lead people to answers. If she encountered opposition, she was not hesitant to confront the perpetrator. If it didn't work, she was willing to contact headquarters and escalate the problem. Many of the office managers who opposed her found themselves looking for other jobs. As her reputation grew, Vicky started traveling more. She was often gone for up to 2 weeks per month. I detested it, as did she. We had a long discussion about it. She was confident that she would be able to command the department within 2 years. She would not have to travel if she was promoted, and she would be given a large raise. We promised to continue as things were, until that opportunity arose with the economy fall. Failing, my tiny business had to begin accepting projects. We would have declined before the housing boom and stock market meltdown. We had already cut around half of our personnel. Fortunately, we were not in financial trouble because we had no major loans or expenses. However, our profitability was no longer as high. One of the minor jobs I chose to bid on began my marriage's downward spiral. Oh, how wish I had not committed to seek that job. Maybe I could have stayed blissfully married. Or perhaps not. On a Thursday morning, I strolled into my office and wondered why I had bothered coming in. I had stayed late the night before and finished all of the stuff on my desk. Vicky had been away all week for a compliance review. Based on previous chats, I knew she wouldn't be home until late Friday evening, so I concentrated on work. That morning, I almost skipped out of the office and went straight to one of our 3 project sites to spend the day, getting my hands filthy and monitoring the work. As many of you are aware, having the boss present on site and capable of executing any activity is the ideal approach to keep employees motivated and ensure quality. I hadn't been at my desk long when my assistant alerted me. She answered, "Don, we are pretty casual here. I aim to treat my crew like a family, Mrs. Sloan has arrived and would like to discuss installing a deck and beautifying her property. Have you got time to meet with her?" I remember thinking, wonderful. Despite the little deck and a few plants, I chose to meet with her. Nevertheless, after all, a few days of work could be squeezed in, keeping some of the crew employed and allowing them to support their families. I was startled when Mrs. Sloan entered my office. I was almost at a loss for words. She reminded me of Mrs. Horton, the first woman I had become obsessed with to the point that I cowed and expressed myself. I soon gathered my calm and rose to greet her. I smiled and added, "It is a pleasure to meet you, Mr. SSLN. I am Tom Patterson." Mrs. Simpson indicated that you were interested in having a deck built. Is this correct? Oh, I apologized, I said. Please have a seat as we review your requirements. You're not usually like this, but you remind me of a woman I knew when I was younger. It's as if she just entered the room. I hope you can forgive me, Mrs. Sloan chuckled and said, "Don, it's Rachel." I suppose she observed my reluctance and bewilderment, because she said, "You know, Rachel Horton, Donita and Alfred Horton were my parents. We used to visit your family, Erie, on a regular basis." "Oh my goodness," I exclaimed. "I'm sorry. You were so young and you've changed." Rachel giggled, her voice like a delightful chime, and then spoke. "Well, I suppose we've all changed a little. I was just 10 years old when Mother and Daddy separated. She took me and we were able to afford your charges afterwards." Rachel took a big breath and began again. "Anyway, my husband and I recently purchased a home close to where we previously lived. And he says, we can add a deck and cabana with a hot tub. I believe we may also have enough to landscape, if the price isn't too exorbitant. When I discovered out you owned a construction company, I had to approach you first to see if you were interested." We spent the majority of the morning reminiscing about the past and discussing what she and her husband, Michael, envisioned. After determining what she wanted in broad terms, I informed her that I would need to visit the house and take measurements before producing a proposal. She answered, "No problem. Don, we can leave now, or because I don't work. Whatever time you want to do it is okay with me." Tell me what I said. "How about I stop by about 1 this afternoon? I need to check in on my crews and have something to eat first. Then, you'll have the rest of the afternoon to measure and prepare the bid. Does this work for you?" Rachel left the office, and I walked her out. I informed Karen, my assistant, that I would be out for the remainder of the day. I'm going to visit all of the job sites, eat lunch, and then go over to Mrs. Sloan's a bit on her project. Simply lock up as you leave. If you require my assistance, I will be available via phone. Everything was going well at the job sites, but I took a bit longer than necessary to speak with one of the property owners. That delay made me late for lunch, and I arrived at the Sloane's house. About 1:30 Rachel met me at the door, and I apologized for my tardiness, Mrs. Sloane. I apologize for being late. I got tangled up with one of the property owners and ran over. I tried calling, but just got voicemail. Rachel chuckled softly and replied, Dawn, I told you it's Rachel. I apologize. I did not hear the phone. I was outside cleaning the pool after I got home and neglected to bring the cordless. It's not a huge deal. You're here. Now, would you like something to drink or should we go directly to the backyard? I am fine. Rachel, then go out and look at your backyard. I responded. After obtaining all the appropriate measurements, I stated, well, it's easy to price. Most of the material's well made. But since you don't have a hot tub yet, you'll need to pick one out before I can finalize the bid. The tub's measurements will decide the materials we'll need to order. Rachel appeared puzzled. Oh, she said. I assumed you would also supply the bathtub. I don't know much about them. And can't you just include that in your bid? I chuckled and responded, yes. Rachel, I can do that, but we do not sell them directly. I will need to buy one for you. And to do so, I need some information, such as the size you want, whether it will be in ground or stand alone, and whether it will run onto 110 or 110. Rachel's look became worried, and my heart sunk slightly. It reminded me of how she'd get obviously upset over minor issues when she was younger. I lowered my tone and said, let's not worry about it right now. We can review the choices, and you could phone or talk to your husband tonight. I can hold off on finishing the bid until you decide on the type of tub you want. Rachel's eyes fluttered nervously, and she appeared wobbly. Oh no, she replied immediately. I can't call him about it. He told me to handle everything, and I intend to do exactly that. He is away on business in Denver, and I won't see him until the weekend. Perhaps we can figure it out together. Her tenacity made me grin, and I started asking questions to better understand their requirements. I discovered from our talk that they didn't entertain often, and Rachel was the one who used the backyard pool the most. She occasionally had a buddy or two around, but it was not a regular thing with this information. I proposed that we go to my supplier's showroom and look at tubs in person. Rachel gravitated toward a smaller 5-person hot tub. She loved its simplicity and practicality, and, after making the decision, I noted the dimensions and material needs. Back at her house, I inquired, do you have a place where I can connect to the internet? We'll need to access my office system to get today's updated price list. Some of the items I need to put in the estimate vary every Thursday, and I want to make sure everything is correct. Rachel smiled and replied, sure. Dan, why don't you come into the office? Michael is a manufacturer's representative who specializes in saving company systems. He had a gray office set up so he could work from home when he was traveling. You can connect your laptop to ours. You can use our computer or access the internet through the portal. Either one. I came into the office and froze in surprise. He put it out, almost like a typical company office in an office building. His desk was to the left of the door and faced the room. Windows peered out the side of the office, overlooking the backyard. 2 excellent leather chairs sat in front of the desk, with a bookshelf opposite. I was impressed. Rachel moved behind the desk and pulled out the chair. She smiled at me and added, you can sit here while working. If you require anything, please ask. Thank you, I replied. As I moved behind the desk, I put my laptop on the desk and sat down. Rachel handed me the DSL cord to connect to my computer when I reached for it. I had to pass over a picture. I took a quick look at the image and then paused. I drew back my hand and glanced at it before reaching out and picking it up. Rachel stared at me, perplexed, holding the cable out to me. She noticed my face and the way I was squeezing the image and asked, Dawn, is something wrong? That's my husband's pride and joy. I keep trying to persuade him to throw away that photo and take another one of his gel, but he refuses. I'm sick of having to look at his excrement whenever I use the desk. Dawn, don't look at me that way. What is the matter? Rachel asked again. I carefully set the photo down and pushed away from the desk. I looked at Rachel and asked, "Did you tell me your husband is in Denver?" She looked astonished. Then replied, "Yes, I did. Why?" "My wife is in Denver and has been there all week." Rachel, did you ask Michael in where you could get an estimate? Or did you tell him you were going to talk to me? No, Don. What difference does it make? Anyway, he simply asked if I needed a deck and a hot tub before getting estimates. He said, if it didn't cost more than $2,000, I could do it. So why are you asking these questions? Rachel, the woman Michael is with in this photo is my wife. Rachel smiled and commented, "Oh, how strange, you married Michael's former girlfriend. We have only been married 18 months. When did you marry?" I felt my stomach churn and looked up at Rachel. "Vicky, and I have been married for 9 years. She's wearing the necklace in that photo, which was taken no more than 2 years ago. I purchased her a gift for Christmas a little over 2 years ago. Purchased the clothes she is wearing for her upcoming vacation next summer." Rachel stood for a time. Then she added, "Dawn, I'm sorry if you're saying what I believe you are, but why are you concerned that she is in Denver?" Rachel, you stated you'd been married for 18 months. Do you know when this photo was taken based on what Vicky was wearing in this photo? I believe it was shot around the time you married. When did Michael get it framed? Why, he remarked, but that can't be true because the photo was shot on the day he won first place in the huge state Chevrolet car show. That was. Rachel started crying and sank onto one of the nice chairs in front of the desk. She proceeded gently, "That was 3 weeks before our marriage. I just never thought about it. I mean, he claimed it was an old photo, but he is carrying the first place trophy." Oh God, ew. Rachel, wait. Don suggested that we think this through. I observed it all while working at the restaurant. I learned to ignore and avoid discussing other people's affairs because cheaters are usually caught at the finish. I realize that looks horrible, but all we know for now is that Michael and Vicky are standing in front of his car, arms around each other. We also know the picture was taken between 18 months and 2 years ago. You are considerably younger than we are. I don't think Michael is Vicky's old boyfriend, because we started dating when we were 18 and both worked at Dad's restaurant. He could be, but I'm not sure who she had crushes on when she was younger. Any more than you likely do for Michael. How old is he? Anyway, they just want to know. I'm 27. It's feasible, because Vicky isn't yet 31. I honestly don't know. So what do we do? If we ask them about this, all they'll do is deny it, whether they are having an affair or have a history. If we ask if they are having an affair, they leave or become more discreet. I feel compelled to ask, and yet before today, I would have replied that I trusted Vicky completely. I honestly don't know. We spoke more and came up with what we deemed an acceptable idea. We would not mention anything about what we believed we had learned at that day. Rachel refused to tell Michael about our conversation regarding the deck, and we planned to hire a private investigator to check on Vicky and Michael. The next day, Rachel and I spoke with the security organization we use for our building sites who sent us to the Asian company they use. We spoke with their representatives and signed a contract for their services. We each paid them a check for our portion of the retainer and returned to our houses. Rachel had reduced the name on the check so that if Michael inquired, she could explain that it was a deposit for the work we had discussed, and that I used the company account. Vicky never saw the books or checks, so I was safe. I would only have to reimburse the company after 3 weeks. Rachel, and I met with the investigator. He said, "Done, Rachel. I apologize. No, it is not correct. I'm pleased to inform that we have found no evidence that your husbands are seeing each other, or even know each other. We followed them every lunch hour and afterward, but they did nothing. They should not have done this. The only out-of-the-norm event occurred last Friday, when Mrs. Patterson and some of the women she works with went out after work. They visited various pubs at Street Lewis Landing and danced with several men. Vicky did dance with Michael once, but it was appropriate. There was space between them. and neither allowed their hands to roam. There was no kissing or anything inappropriate. They were never spotted talking to each other again. After the dance, I sighed and slumped back in my seat. I looked at the investigator first, then at the Rachel. I was starting to believe that this whole issue was the product of my inherent distrust. I learned it while working in the family business. I had reviewed all of the phone records. We had even placed cameras and recorders throughout the house, as well as recorders in Vicky's car and pocketbook. They were beautifully clean. Also, finally, I shrugged and remarked, "Moret was on the first one. Well, we can just chalk this up to paranoia." Then, you have no idea how relieved I am to learn this, but I am also extremely embarrassed. I even expected Vicky and Michael to do something like this. We can just stop it. Wait a minute. Rachel, didn't you tell me Michael was heading to see Antonio next week? Rachel looked bewildered before saying yes. What does that have to do with anything? Oh, we won't need to follow anyone next week, shall we? I believe that is precisely when we need to have them followed. Vicky informed me 2 weeks ago that she would do a compliance evaluation next week. I can't remember where she claimed she was going for sure, but I believe it was Austin, Texas, depending on where they reside in those towns. They may only be an hour or less away. We have pretty much established that they do not meet in this location. I believe we should at least examine this next trip to see whether they come out clean. Despite what we saw in that picture, I'm willing to concede that I was being a paranoid fool. It's logical to suppose that if they were old friends, Vicky would let them photograph her with him and his prize throughout the Downton investigation. Dawn and Rachel could find no indication. Vicky or Michael handled them differently in some way. They were exactly the same. They'd always been. Dawn thought, but he couldn't think of a single way. Vicky was different from when they were dating or shortly after their marriage. She treated him as if he were the only man in the universe. She came to him, wanting an NTI Emily, and he received it. When he asked, she responded as she usually had. She was just as loving and considerate as she had always been. Dawn and Vicky went out to eat on a date night, the Friday before Vicky's next trip. While they were snuggled in bed later that night, Dawn asked, "Vicky, do you remember when we worked at Dad's restaurant? We used to chuckle at all the cheaters and inappropriate behavior." Dawn suspected a tiny tightening of Vicky's muscles, but he was certain. She smiled, raised her face up toward his and replied, "Yes, some of the people were really foolish. When one of the guys or ladies at work does anything like that, it reminds me of those days, and how stupid they are. Why one of the men at work believes his wife is cheating on him, but he hasn't discovered any evidence to prove it. When he informed me about his anxieties, I remembered those days and advised him to relax. I warned him that if she was cheating, he should keep his eyes and ears open, since the cheater will always be discovered in the end. I reminded him that the longer he waited to find out, the better for his children, because divorce usually damages them." Vicky seemed a little unhappy, as she asked, "Why do you assume the marriage will automatically end in divorce? Perhaps the wife genuinely loves her husband, and is just. Perhaps the affair means nothing to her, and she does not want a divorce." "Oh no, Vicky. H.E.S. exactly like me. He used to see people in bars and they had the same low tolerance for cheating as we have. I can't imagine him simply accepting a long-term affair more than you. Or I would. I believe he might be willing to accept a one-night stand. But what of an affair? No way." Vicky tightened up again when he mentioned he wouldn't accept a long-term affair, but she smiled and turned to face him. She gave him a gentle kiss and remarked, "I'm glad you're still the man I married. We are both aware of flagrant affairs and the grief they may cause if he does have a problem. Bring him around, and perhaps you and I can assist him in his recovery. Good night, honey." Dawn and Vicky settled into their bed and fell asleep due to the amount of tossing and turning. None of them fell asleep quickly. However, the following week was extremely difficult for Dawn. He called the investigators twice to check if they had discovered anything, but all he was told was our agents are monitoring both of them, and we will have a report for you next Monday. Finally, On Monday day, Rachel and Dom met in the investigator's office. When they sat down, they could almost tell he had bad news. The investigator leaned back in his chair and remarked, "You know, when you asked us to follow your spouses last week, I almost told you it was a waste of money. This was one of the most challenging cheating spouse scenarios we've ever encountered. You were right. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Step N. Vicky, you are having an affair. We have images and tape discussions to prove it. He'd be astonished if we'd stopped after following them through the street. Lewis area. We would never have discovered this. Based on the discussions we recorded, it appears that they only meet 3 or 4 times a year in cities. Far away. Even there, they claim to meet by coincidence, if they are out in town, and they take great care to maintain the appearance of being old acquaintances. What we discovered, however, was a couple of extremely intelligent cheaters. They visited different locations and stayed into separate hotels. They met in a third hotel, although they did not share a room. They hired separate rooms at different periods, but the rooms shared a connecting door. Michael paid for his room in cash, so there is no paper trace. Vicky enrolled as Angela Foster and used a credit card with that name and an address in Washington, Missouri. Angela Foster was the name on her state identification card. Michael enrolled as Michael Lennon, once again using his stated card for identification. In addition, they exclusively rented these rooms on Tuesday and Thursday nights. They didn't stay the entire night and only saw each other for these 2 days. I sat back, thinking. I had said Foster was Vicky's maiden name. Samantha, Angela Foster. Rachel merely stated that Alan is Michael's middle name. Well, I suppose it's all over, except for the tears. He'll speak with the divorce attorney. As soon as I can schedule an appointment. Rachel began to speak. When the investigator broke in, he said, Wait. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. I generally don't bring it up, but in this situation, I just can't believe this is how it looks. I know they were intimate, but it doesn't look like an affair. It looks more like they were playing a game. We have hours of tape discussion. Assess, the most of which are pretty benign throughout the week. There were only 2 intimate sessions and the pillow chat was rather odd. Let me put a tape in and show you what I mean. When the investigator had gotten the recording to the point where he wanted us to listen, we overheard Vicky discussing. She added, You know, Michael, I'm beginning to think we need to win this one. We've gotten by with it for 6 years, and had a good time. We've demonstrated that we are the exception to the rule, and our astute cheaters. I believe you will admit that our Emily is not as strong as it is without wives. Besides something Don said on Friday night disturbed me. We were talking in bed, and he reminded me of what we learned at his parents' restaurant. He reminded me that cheaters are eventually caught. Nobody ever prepares for every possible scenario. All cheaters eventually get overconfident or make a minor error that leads to their detection. I'm still worried about Denver. That was the first time we had ever been to the same place, and I still believe it was a mistake. We shouldn't have changed the plan. We should have only gotten together when we could go to separate towns near enough together to meet in the center as we are now. I understand that messing up 2 rooms and paying for a room we don't use is inconvenient, but I believe we have accomplished our goal. We are intelligent cheaters, and if you play the game correctly, you can cheat and win. I truly don't want to lose Don. I am completely in love with him. H.E.S. the best dude I've ever met. We met after the first couple of times. The only genuine charge I got from this whole affair was the planning and intrigue. I can spend hours arranging and contemplating the deceptions. Getting it and making bookings and travel arrangements is preferable to doing a crossword puzzle or Sudoku. The Don Emily just dulls my edge. Now don't get too much on me. I know you feel the same way. You informed me in Denver that you constantly return to your hotel, dissatisfied. The investigator paused the recording and resumed chatting. He claimed there was more, but this was the most perplexing aspect of the chats. I can't understand why. When Don began to giggle, the investigator paused and peered at him. Finally, he took control of himself and said, "I'm sorry. I don't think this is funny and I'm angry. But there's something about that conversation. I suppose I should explain. You see, several years ago, a couple that Vicky and I were acquaintances with divorced. The wife had cheated and been caught. It turns out she had been hanging the horns on her spouse for over 4 years before being caught. And it was a simple mistake that tripped her up. We were out with other friends. The night we discovered out about the affair and divorce, we had a conversation about Chief and the dumb things. Cheaters. We remembered what my father said and we saw while working at the restaurant. Vicky insisted that she didn't care if anyone wanted to cheat, as long as they kept it under control and were savvy. I was on the other side of the argument, telling her that there was no way that could happen, and that the cheater would be caught. Eventually. It might take years, but it will happen. I cautioned her that the adultery might come to light in a seemingly innocuous way, but it would. We eventually agreed to disagree, but Vicky kept mentioning something about smart cheaters winning for several weeks to the best of my memories. Her affair with Michael began. Around the time we had that argument, Vicky has always been proud of her brains, and I believe I hit the wrong button. When we discussed the affair, I believe she was attempting to prove she could do it and get away with it. I suppose she might have stopped it sooner now. No, she's not going to get away with it. Don and Rachel were once again together. This time, they were waiting for their divorce attorney appointment. Since sharing the investigator's expenses worked so well, they decided to share a divorce attorney. Also, when Don was called into the office, the attorney was astonished. He said, "Mr. Patterson, this is Mrs. Patterson." Don grinned and replied, "No, sir. I'm afraid not. I'm Don Patterson, and this is Rachel Sloan. We discovered our husband and my wife were cheating on each other and splitting the investigator's fees to get the goods on them. We felt we might perhaps be able to divide your charge. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the church side." David Thompson grinned and indicated at chairs as he responded, "Of course. Maybe we can figure something out. Could you please have a seat while we discuss this?" Don stated and handed the attorney a copy of the investigator's report and photographs before the attorney could review them. Don stated, "I do not believe my case will be too difficult. I also brought a list of everything Vicky and I possess, including when and how we obtained each item. I also have a copy of our prenuptial agreement, which specifies not only how we share property, but also who gets custody of the children. All I want is a divorce for adultery, and the compensation outlined in the prenup. I'm afraid Rachel's case will be slightly more challenging." Don handed his attorney the documentation he had brought to support his divorce. He leaned back in his chair, waiting for him to finish reviewing the forms. After the attorney had taken Don's paperwork, Rachel handed him a similar one for herself. The only difference was that she did not have a prenuptial agreement. The attorney described the divorce process, timeline, and fee structure to the two friends. Then, he talked about what Rachel desired from her divorce, if she could have it. Finally, he stated, "I believe I have enough for now. I need to review all of the documentation in the investigator's report. I'll call if I have any questions. Otherwise, we'll prepare the documentation and proceed from there. Do you want me to serve the papers or phone you first?" Don and Rachel both wanted to be phoned when the papers were ready to be served. They left the office and went about their business, agreeing to remain in touch. 2 days later, Don received a call from David Thompson. After the pleasantries were completed, David remarked, "Don, I reviewed everything you gave me, and I have to say, this is the strangest case I've ever seen. I even had two of my partners review it, and they both agreed. There is no doubt there was infidelity, but I believe the woman loves you, and this doesn't even appear to be an affair. It's almost as if it was a game and they needed closeness to participate. Don, are you sure you want to forward with this divorce? I mean, based on what you've said, You had a nearly perfect marriage. You did not argue your intimate life was above average. You appeared to love and respect each other. Dawn, if you don't mind my stating. So it's almost as if you're playing the game. It is your time now. And the only option available to you is divorce. Can't you talk to and move past this? I know you've heard the tapes. And she told Michael. They needed to quit and that it was all a game to her. Dawn sat and reflected for a time. Finally, he told David no. David, I'd asked myself that same question. And at one point, I believe I was able to do just that. I could have ignored it if it had just been a game. And they hadn't actually made love. If it had merely been emotional or even a fictive affair. Perhaps, Vicky was offended at first because I denied her belief in the existence of a sophisticated cheater. She couldn't understand that there were no smart cheaters. And that they would all be caught. If she hadn't taken the next step and allowed Michael to sleep with her, I could have gotten through it. But this has been going on too long. I mean, 6 years. Even if the closeness was limited, and they did not enjoy it as much as they did with Rachel and me, it was still adultery. She must face the consequence. David. Sorry. Well, this is your life. I hate having to do this to you. I have the papers ready for filing. When would you like to have her served? Dawn smiled. David. She and Michael are visiting the East Coast this week. She should return late Friday afternoon. Can we serve her at work this Friday? I believe her plane lands around midday. So she should get at the office around 3:30 or for it. Like her to be served and get a tape that I created for her. It is a conversation in which she and Michael discuss resigning. You can listen to it. Of course. But in the end, I believe you will lose. As previously said, cheaters consistently make mistakes and get caught. Don gathered all of his teams in his office on Friday morning before they headed out to work. He stated why he and Vicky were separating. He instructed them not to take any orders from her and to keep his personal life and business apart. Taryn, his secretary, apologized to Don as they left. I can't believe Vicky would do anything like this. I recall how Mom despised cheats. Taryn laughed and proceeded. I mean, some of the things she used to say. If we saw someone we knew doing something similar, wow. Don received a call from the attorney at 410 that afternoon, informing him that the papers had been served at 430. Don received the phone call he had been dreading. He recognized Vicky from the caller. He took up the phone and said hello to Vicky. He overheard sobbing, then a little, faintly, trembling voice, murmured Don. Can't we move on from this? You already know how much I love you. I realize I was so naive now. But you made me upset that night. When you used your superior manner to hammer me for saying a smart cheater could get away with it. Don, for the first year, all we did was plan and meet to prove we could do it. I know you heard me when I said I didn't love Michael, and that the Emily wasn't very good. You knew we were going to quit. Please, Don, do not do this to us. I still can't believe you found out after so many years. I would love to know how you achieved it. Vicky, I did not do this to us. Did you? Now, I have to put an end to it. I assumed we were completely in agreement on cheating in our affairs. Hell, I knew neither of us approved of cheating. We agreed that cheaters would get what they deserved in the end. So I suppose. I know. I'm just wondering how you could have ever done something like this. How could you possibly explain doing this? I feel like we both do. Don decided to sympathize with Vicky in one way. He decided to tell her how he became involved in the affair. Vicky, I never intended to tell you how I captured you. But now, I guess I will. You were partly correct when you stated you should never have gone to Denver together. That Thursday, before you arrived home, I was in the office and Rachel Sloan entered. She asked us to build a deck and plant her backyard. Afterward, she let me use Michael's office, and I noticed your picture with him, and the award his automobile received at the State Classic Chevrolet Car Exhibition. She informed me you were one of his former girlfriends. I almost bought it until I noticed you looked aged enough in the picture for it to be recent. In addition, I saw you were wearing jewelry and clothing that were only approximately 2 years old. I was almost ready to dismiss my concerns and believe you had dated before. We became a couple and had simply run into him at the car show. I altered my mind after Rachel, and I talked a little longer and I discovered you were both in Denver. That week, we chose to employ an investigator and have you followed. We watched you both over the next month, with the exception of one dance. During your girls' night out, you had no contact. We were going to end the investigation and chalk it up to a coincidence that you happened to see Michael and pose with him for the photo by that point. Rachel and I were exchanging all kinds of information on the two of you. And I remembered. She told me Michael was going to be in San Antonio, while you said you were going to be in Austin. We decided to follow you for a week. If we hadn't discovered anything, we were going to abandon it. But we did find something. Right. Don could hear sniffles in the background. Vicky then said, Don. I really love you. I do not want to lose you. Could you please forgive me? Just once. Don sighed and said, No, honey. I just can't. At least I can't right now. I guess I could, if you weren't with the jerk. But I can't support you being with him and having the affair for so long. But honey, can't you see? Was it truly not an affair? Well, it was more of a game. I merely needed to show that it could be done. The INTI Emily. Well, the INTI Emily came about because we were away from home and became so physically drawn to each other that it was almost as if we were relieving ourselves. We never made love, or as far as I can remember, told each other we loved them. It was always about playing the game, and the last few years have been about finding some relaxation. Vicky, it does not matter. All that counts is that you completed it. You planned to make a fool of me, and you succeeded. You had to meet Michael somewhere and make plans to get together with him. I wouldn't be surprised if that was one of your girls' evenings out. Right. Vicky groaned and replied, Yes, darn yes. It was at the moment. We were simply talking. He had approached the table and invited me to dance the girls, and I were discussing a couple we saw in the pub that we worked with. They were all over each other, and I made the usual statement about smart sheets and how there were none while we were dancing before. Michael walked me back to the table. I told him about the talk and what you, and I believed. He said, You know, I think we could beat that rap. I travel a lot, and if I could find someone who does the same, I'm sure we could meet in a different town far away from home and cheat without anyone catching us. We danced a few more times that night before deciding to attempt it. I discovered that he traveled as a manufacturer's representative, and he discovered that. I conducted compliance reviews. We exchanged notes and realized we'd be in the same general region approximately 3 weeks later. So we decided to meet at that meeting. We began arranging our ideal affair. We agreed not to call each other at home or on our cell phones. We generally used throwaway cell phones and called from work or lunch, but only to schedule future meetings. We acquired the fake kids, and I bought a new credit card and had the bill mailed to a PO box near my parents' home. You know how often I visit there, so I can check the box. We covered all of the bases, except for the photo. I had no idea he had it taken. Vicky laughed half-heartedly and went on. I guess it's just one little slip. As we always say, we will receive a cheater card. Very sorry. Honey, I guess I got caught up in the intrigue. I love you. Don heard a click. When Vicky hung up the phone, he was astonished to find tears streaming down his cheeks. He leaned back in his chair, contemplating. He had no idea when Karen said, Good night. His next remembrance was being surprised that it was dark outside prior to the official divorce decree, and both sets of parents attempted to persuade Don not to divorce Vicky at various points. Her parents made perhaps the most sincere plea. They called him one Saturday and asked if they might come to his house and see the kids. Naturally, he agreed. After spending some time with the youngsters, the 3 adults sat in pool chairs in the shade, watching the kids in the water. Vicky's mother turned to Don and stated, We all know my daughter has made a complete fool of herself. When she arrived at our house that first night, she was sad. We could barely get out of her. What went wrong? She was frantic and claimed she had ruined it. We eventually calmed her down enough to get the narrative out of her. She showed us all the proof you had on her, Don. I must add that, if I had found her father doing what she did, I would have also stopped it. But can't you do what I say, rather than what I would do? I know. She cares deeply about you. I can see that whenever she looks at you, every time she mentions you, every time she sees a photo of you. Her difficulty is that she is intellectually superior. She was so accustomed to being the brightest woman in the room that she felt compelled to demonstrate her ability to handle something like this. Don, did you ever consider that you may have influenced her decision to do this? She told me about the quarrel you had with your buddies. Right. Before she determined to prove she could have an affair without being detected. Don looked across at his mother-in-law and replied, yes, Mona. I'd considered contributing to her affair. I think, because of what I stated. If she had merely met him and not had Emily, I could have moved on. However, she didn't. You remember how we both expressed our feelings on cheaters before we married? You know how adamant she was about the castles and the prenuptial agreement that dealt with infidelity. Then, she did something like this. No, I simply cannot let this go. I'm in tears about this, but I just cannot. The divorce was finalized and Don was relieved that they had a prenuptial agreement. They had a few investments they had to split. They also owned the house together. His firm was under the family name, and the only shares he had were considered gifts to him. Vicky was completely excluded. Don let Vicky withdraw the value of her half of the house from the investment account, so he owned it free and clear. Don was always kind to Vicky when he saw her, and he never made her feel uncomfortable about visiting the children. He still wanted to hold her whenever he saw her, but he knew he could never trust her. Again, he invited the kids to supper at the restaurant. One evening, when Rachel entered the building, she stood in the doorway and looked around. She seemed unsure about herself. The hostess approached her and inquired about seeing. Rachel held out one finger. When Don noticed this, he bolted out of his chair. He intercepted the hostess and Rachel before they could reach her table. He said, Rachel, it is great to see you. I observed you tell Patty that you were alone. If you like, I can accompany only my children. We could share a table. Rachel gazed at Don for a time before smiling. He felt his heart lift and the entire room appeared lighter. She came forward and gave him a brief embrace and kiss on the cheek. Thank you, she replied. I think you'd like that. I felt quite lonely since Don presented Rachel to his children before she had even opened the menu. His father approached the table and asked, Don, have you been holding out on me? Who is this stunning lady? Don laughed, and Rachel smiled. Don turned to his father and said, This is Rachel Sloan. It was her spouse. Her mother was Donna Horton. They would come in here when I was a youngster, Mr. Patterson grinned and replied, Oh yes, I remember you. Now you look so much like your mother. I can't believe I hadn't recognized you. How are your parents doing? I haven't seen them for years. Rachel looked up at Mr. Patterson and remarked, They're both fine, I suppose. I would occasionally call my father. He moved away after the divorce and now lives in Kansas City. I see my mother a few times a month. She lives north of town. Well, have a good time tonight. I hope you will return. Now that you remember where we are after Rachel placed her order. Don asked, How have you been? I apologize for not calling you more often, but summer is my busiest time of year. I guess I could use that as an excuse. I could have found the time. I apologize. Oh, don't be stupid, Rachel advised. I understand you're busy, and I did not call you either. In fact, I am here tonight to celebrate. Michael ultimately gave up, and my divorce was finalized. Today, we had to sell the house, and we split the proceeds 5,050. He opposed the alimony and prolonged the divorce as a result. But since he was the one who didn't want me to work, I eventually wanted to finish. I needed to rent a tiny flat. But as soon as I have a job, he'll be in a better situation. Following the dinner, the children became increasingly restless. Don and Rachel were speaking finally. Don told Rachel, I guess I need to leave before these two little troublemakers get me banned from this place. It's been lovely to speak with you again. Perhaps we can do this again." Rachel smiled and nodded her head. She replied, "Id, like that, let's." She flagged down the waitress and requested the bill. The waitress smiled and stated that both bills had been paid. Don laughed. He stated that old rascal I usually pay. And he knows it. I believe HES attempting to set us up. He dug into his wallet and left an acceptable tip on the table for the waitress before standing. "Come on, kids, tell your grandparents. Good night. And well, head home." Don helped Rachel get out of her chair and gave her his arm. "May I accompany you to your carriage, my lady?" he asked. Rachel smiled, grasped his arm and replied, "You may, good sir." And while they waited for the kids to return, Don turned to Rachel and said, "You know, I don't want this night to end before you come in. I was expecting to arrive home in time to sit by the pool and relax. All I had to look forward to was one night alone with the kids." Rachel looked up at Dawn and spoke. "I agree, except that my flat does not have a pool, and I do not have children. Rachel, it is still early. Would you like to see us again once I get these two into bed?" Rachel smiled and nodded her head. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, that would be very nice." After the kids went to bed, Don filled a cooler with drinks and ice. He placed it between their pool seats and instructed Rachel to choose her pick. He reached for a Pepsi and leaned back. Rachel had a Pepsi as well. Don sighed as he gazed at the pool, which glistened in the dim lighting, and then turned to Rachel. He said, "You know, I believe your mother is partially responsible for my divorce. Oh, I am sorry, Rachel. I should not have said that. I was just thinking." Well, Rachel was sitting there staring at him with anxiety. He thought. He noticed a small tear in her eye. Don struggled up from his chair and took a seat on Rachel's edge. He gently brushed the tears from the corner of her eyes and added, "Let me explain. Now that I've made a mess. When I was 16, I had only been working at the restaurant for about 3 weeks. When your mother entered with a man I did not recognize after supper. They went to the bar to drink and dance. I've always believed your mother was the most gorgeous woman in the world. That was until I met you. Anyway, I couldn't take my eyes off her, and my father not only observed me staring at her, but also heard what I said. When we returned to school the following Monday, I had to tell my friends what I had seen. I still recall the lesson I received that night in his office. That event, however, I believe, has had a lasting impact on my thoughts and ideas regarding marital ity. You know, ahead of sin, Vicky subsequently came to work with us and received the same speech. We used to discuss a lot about our experiences and what we saw at the restaurant. I believed. We agreed with my father's attitude. Perhaps I was too obstinate about loyalty for my own good. I was just thinking my encounter with your mother that night set me on the rigorous route that I would take throughout this affair. I apologize. And before you ask, the answer is no one in my family, or among our employees, told on your mother. I'm not sure who did it, but your parents split about a year later. And as far as I know, that was the only time she and her companion visited the restaurant. Rachel looked at Dawn and remarked, "Well, depending on how you look at it, something good may have come out of that mess. She married that man, and they lived together until he died in a vehicle accident a few years ago. I'm not sure, but I believe she may have been unfaithful to him too. I'd always heard that once someone cheats, they're more likely to do so." Again, Don was certain. Rachel had calmed down. He returned to his chair, and they resumed conversing about more pleasant matters. He discovered she had an accounting degree and had worked in the area for long. He laughed to himself, recalling his mother's concerns about wanting to take more time off, but being unable to do so, because she handled the bar and restaurants, books and supervised the waitstaff. Don had also considered hiring some additional support for Karen, possibly the following Wednesday. Don hadn't been home from work long enough to do more than fetch a glass of water, when he heard a knock on the front door. He opened it to find Rachel crying and clutching him. She spoke through her tears. "Thank you. Oh, thank you. Your folks called to offer me a job. I went for the test interview and was hired. I start tomorrow. They are paying me more than I ever expected." She burst into tears again, and Don simply held her to his chest, tenderly, caressing her hair over the next 6 months. Don and Rachel grew close. He began bringing the kids to the restaurant for supper, more frequently at their visits, so that Rachel, the bookkeeping accountant, was available to join them. Christmas arrived and Rachel was invited to the Patterson family dinner. Don and Rachel worked together at the bars. New Year's Eve celebration. His father and siblings ridiculed them for not being much assistance, as they frequently find them sharing moments of tenderness. They were now considered a couple, and every invitation they got seemed to include the other Valentine's Day as here. It was another busy day at the restaurant, so Don and Rachel were asked to help out. After the majority of the customers had left, Don entered the eating area and asked Rachel, "Can you come to the bar for a minute? The band is on break, and I need you to assist me on stage for a moment." Rachel smiled and replied, "Sure. I needed a break from here." Anyhow, when they got to the stage, Don requested Rachel to hold the microphone stand while he crouched down to adjust something. He raised his voice and asked, "Can I get some light over here?" Rachel, preoccupied, started hunting for a light. A spotlight shined down on the two of them. "Don," and said. Rachel and the microphone picked up his voice and aired it around the room. When Rachel looked down at him, she noticed he was holding something out for her to take. It was a small black square, which she imagined was part of the microphone stand. The illumination was so intense that she couldn't see clearly. Rachel reached for the object Don was giving her. He started speaking again. "Rachel, I'm down here, requesting you from my heart. Will you marry me? You've restored light to my life, and I only find happiness when I'm with you." Rachel took in his words as her fingertips brushed against the box. She closed her palm over the package and asked, "Wait, did you just say?" Rachel opened the little package to discover a lovely ring lying inside. Her jaw dropped open with amazement. She gasped and reflexively covered her lips. She slowly removed the ring and, almost in shock, placed it upon her left ring. Finger tears began to trickle down her cheeks. She knelt beside Don and pulled him into a deep, passionate kiss. "Yes," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "Oh yes, I love you. With all my heart. I've been dreaming about this moment for months, and I'm hoping you did too." The audience erupted in cheers and applause as Rachel backed away from the kiss. She looked around and noticed Dan's complete family gathered nearby. Don's brother jumped up and grabbed her in a hug, and she was passed from one family member to the next, each praising the happy couple. The wedding was scheduled for June over the next few months. Rachel gradually relocated her belongings from her little apartment to Dan's house, ready for the next chapter in their lives at the reception. As Dawn and Rachel unwrapped their gifts, they discovered a single yellowed envelope hidden beneath the pile. Inside was a heart-shaped valentine, which appeared to have aged alongside the envelope. The signature had been removed, but it appeared to be Dawn's handwriting. The letter stated, "I received this valentine from the only man I ever loved on our first Valentine's Day. I've adored it ever since. It feels right to pass it forward to you today. Perhaps this is a symbolic transfer of his heart from me to you. May your life together be full of love and understanding. Never allow pride or ignorance destroy what you share." Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened. Take care.